Welcome back to the Sports Business Leaders Podcast. My name is Justin Tichenel, and today's guest is Sean Hanrahan. Sean is a longtime ESPN executive who spent more than 2 decades building integrated marketing, sponsorship, and brand partnership opportunities across the space. And during his career, he worked closely with leagues like the NFL, NBA, and MLB while helping shape out how brands connect with sports fans. We'd love to hear more about your background and entrepreneurial journey and some of the lessons you've learned along the way.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. First of all, when you say over 2 decades, it just makes me sound really old. I'd like to think of myself as a grizzled veteran. So that's way to look another way to look at this. Yeah, my career has mostly been I was either on advertising side, agency side early in my career, which I think if you're a young person is a great place to go. You can cut your teeth on a lot of different things at a small agency. I remember when I started, I was an assistant account executive and a copywriter and, semi-creative director. So I really appreciated all that brought to bear on how I thought about the rest of my career. And then some things, and we talk a little bit about this, sports often are relationships. And, I happen to have a guy who worked for me at Tracy Locker, an agency I was running the Pepsi business. He leaves the agency, he goes to the ABC, and one day he calls me and says, "Hey, Sean, there's this job at ESPN that I think you might be interested in." And I was interested because I had been 7 years on the Pepsi business, and I was getting ready to make up T-shirts that say, "Pepsi, where great ideas go to die." Right? Because I'd gotten frustrated with those guys pitching a lot of ideas. They go, "This is great. We're going to do this," and it would go off into the ether and never happen. So, yeah. So Dan made the connection for me. I go in, had a great interview, and the rest is they say is history. And I got hired primarily because and in the ad sales group to develop a marketing discipline. Because if you think back 25 years ago, advertisers were finally starting to say, "Hey, I'm spending 10, 20, $30 million with you guys, and I want more than spots and dots," as we like to call it. What else can you do for my brand? How do you embed me in the content? How do I get closer to fans? How do you augment what I'm doing with my advertising campaign? And I remember doing some research early on that showed that when we did a feature or a sponsorship with a brand, it immediately made their advertising more effective, made their campaign more memorable, had greater engagement with fans. So once we were able to demonstrate that effectiveness, the selling process became easier and you got a lot more traction. And now today it's just, standard operating procedure for there be, sponsorships in all content and everywhere. And yeah, it was a great run and a lot of fun. The biggest moment, I guess, that I could point to in my career was it's now 23 years ago. I stood up in front of the Home Depot and presented them Game Day, and it's now the longest running sports media sponsorship in the business.
How about that? That's incredible. It was great when we originally had our phone call learning about some of the companies that you advise right now, one of them being open sponsorship with Ishfeen Jolly, who's a former podcast guest of ours.
There you go.
And yes, over the past, how you said 25 years, how companies are getting smarter with how they're making and spending their sponsor dollars. So to go in that same light, thinking about the changes over the past 25 years, can you talk more about from your perspective, what are some of the biggest business shifts that have reshaped the sports industry during that time, really since the turn of the century?
I love turn of the century. Holy cow, we're 25 years in. It's a turn of the century already. All right. Well, listen, the whole idea of sports media has really expanded. When I started, 25 years ago, turn of the century, sports media was really about television networks, right? And now it's digital platforms, tech platforms, creators, athletes, all these new emerging formats have all come to vie for the fans' attention and now, encompass what sports media is all about. And the economics is a much different factor today too. You continue to see sports rights going up. And that's because there's more competition for sports rights than ever before. If you go back to the turn of the century, it was Fox, CBS, ABC, ESPN, and NBC, and that was about it. Now it's Amazon and Netflix is even getting in the game after sort of saying, well, we don't really think we're going to be in sports. And boom, now all of a sudden they have, NFL games and, they're looking for those one of a kind events. I know they've got, was it Mike Tyson and Pacquiao fight going to be coming up on Netflix. And, 5 years ago, that would have been unheard of. You never would have seen that. So if you're a sports rights media holder, you're thrilled because now you have more people than ever before competing for your rights. And consequently, the values go up and you start to ask yourself, what's the ceiling? How high can they go? And I don't know the answer to that. You see private equity firms investing now in sports. And I think the other day I just saw private equity firms taking a piece of the Dolphins and their valuation was over $12 billion. So those only continue to grow. The Lakers are at 10 billion, the Celtics are at 8 billion, I think. So the numbers start to get staggering after a while. And you wonder, because I came from the business side of it, at ESPN, we had two revenue streams, advertising and then cable subscribers. Well, that's going to max out at some point. There's only so much money, the old school networks can spend. The upside, probably is with the streamers. I mean, look at what Apple paid for the MLS, right? $250 million, which seems mind boggling to me when you consider probably the audience that they're going to access. And you wonder in some respects, MLS, are you chasing money in order to lack relevancy to some degree? But so far seems to be working. MLS has been drawing some record crowds lately with some of their exhibition matches. So maybe it's an all boats rise with the tide kind of thing here.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the cool things too, as we've talked about earlier, is just the fact that you have such a diverse array of companies that you advise, but also have tons of experience doing multiple things in the industry. So from that perspective, what trends or opportunities in sports? I know you hit on a few there, but what else is exciting you about the sports industry right now and for the future?
Yeah, it's probably the technology side of things and what that's unlocking. A lot of startups you see now are sports tech oriented. Um, when you look at things like what's happening. If I go on my ESPN app now, which I'm a loyal user of, right? I go on there, and AI has now created for me my Sports Center, and my Sports Center is a reel every day of highlights that are pertinent to me, voiced by a Sports Center anchor. Which 2-3 years ago never would have happened. You wouldn't have seen it in a million years. And I know ESPN has embraced AI across the board because you can't hire enough people to cut all the highlights you need to cut these days because of all the leagues that are out there. So technology on the production side has changed it dramatically. And then you think about things like, what's happening with sports betting and the integration and how you can instantly bet on the next play if you want to, which is, just crazy to think about, from where we were, even 3 or 4 years ago. Immersive media things like where they do these alternative broadcasts now, the Nickelodeon ones that CBS does. ESPN has done them with Disney and the NHL and the NBA and NFL. So I think, the fans are the ones who are in charge almost at this point, right? Because they've got so many options. Now, there's some frustration on the fan side, though, too. Like, where is the game? I want to watch the Mets tonight. Well, for God's sakes, where do I find them? Is it on MLB Network? Is it on Amazon? Is it on ESPN? I think there's some frustration there and navigating the landscape in order to discover, the games. But I think, ESPN, for instance, did a great job. They're agnostic for sports fans, so they will tell you where each game is. If you look at this, look at their scoreboards, it says it's on TBS or it says it's on Fox, and that's because their job is to serve sports fans anytime, anywhere. You can tell I worked there for 25 years. I think I got the language down. But yeah, I think as technology continues to evolve here, like I've been doing a little work with a company. It's just starting up, but they're creating a technology that sits under tracks for track and field, right? And it's going to measure and provide data that's never been seen before. And so you think about what that will do for fans. You think about what MLB does now with pitchers. Oh my God, the spin rate, and it was a changeup versus a slider, and they tell you in a moment exactly everything that's happening with that pitch. Sometimes I think you can get a little carried away. Sometimes, and maybe that's me, I'm old school, but, I just like to sometimes just sit back and watch the game. I don't need to be inundated all the time, but I'm not the young fan, and I think they appreciate that, and it makes the experience more immersive.
We hear about companies that are creating innovative ways for sponsors and rights holders to have access to the teams and the leagues. So one example that we always talk about is called Vocal AI, and they create custom AI built podcasts. And it's cool because you can type in, let's say, as an Eagles fan, and you want to hear about the recent trades or the trade rumors with AJ Brown, and you can come up with a custom podcast based on all the latest news. So I think that's a great example. And there's another company called Courtside Video Entertainment that's based here in Philadelphia. The founder, Greg, he created a way to have advertising space on the courtside perimeter of a basketball court. So there's these great innovative ways that technology is just driving the game forward. And I love to hear your perspective on it being at a company like ESPN for so long that you're so excited for the future.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the NBA, courtside signage. I think the NHL has done a terrific job with their digital sideboard signage. That was that when they first launched that with us, they worked with us and we were only going to be here's how the business side of it works. Great thing for the NHL to do for their sponsors, but if you're ESPN, you're not going to give those sponsors exposure on the air unless they're spending money with ESPN too. So that became a great collaboration with the NHL. Here are the sponsors we're going after for the digital sideboards. Okay, great. Then we're going to tell these guys it's a minimum of make it up $3-5 million in order for you to secure the 20 national games that we have throughout the season for your sideboard signage to appear. So and that kind of relationship is important to have for the media rights holders and for the leagues themselves because you're delivering value, on both sides of it for a sponsor, and that's benefit, to both sides because you're driving revenue. Give me a hint again where I was going with this.
That's a great example, just thinking about win-win scenarios. And another former podcast guest and member of our group, Dominic Bullard, he has a company called Athletiverse, and he figured out a way to put a value on the amount of impressions for a company that's posting on social media. So it's finding these win-win scenarios, I think, are the most valuable ways of doing business, especially in this very technological driven environment that we're in nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about there is, an attribution model, which is a lot of what the advertising media business is trying to crack because is it always the last ad someone saw that motivated them to go buy a product or go visit a store or go to that restaurant? Or was it that you surrounded the fan, right? That they saw your commercial during the game, that they saw your ad digitally, that you saw the post they sponsored in social media? And is it the effectiveness of all that advertising that's driving behavior? And so that's a really interesting example because advertisers continually want to understand what's motivating people, to go buy their product or visit the retail outlet. It's interesting though that there's a study done by Business Insider, probably goes back 5 or 6 years now, though, and because advertisers, brands are enamored with data, right? How do I get my message in front of the right person at the right time, and target them effectively? And what the Business Insider study found was, yes, data is important, targeting is right, but 75% of an ad's effectiveness is still the creative and the messaging. So you can be there, but if your ad is not that good or is not meaningful or doesn't resonate, doesn't matter that you got in front of them. So I think sometimes because everybody's focused on technology and data, and this could be the old school purview, I think creativity gets lost in the shuffle. So
And I agree with what you said earlier, just about how it's all the above. I think it's so hard to quantify whether or not there's one specific ad that pushes somebody over the edge to purchase or do something that you're trying to, advertise. So I definitely agree with what you're saying there.
yeah, and
And
and by the way, just as an aside, there's a lot of bad advertising out there,
yeah,
and no greater place to see it than watch the Super Bowl. It still is a guy who, I launched Creative Works internally at ESPN, which is the first time a legacy media company launched an advertising agency internally because we wanted to provide that value and service for advertisers. And as I watch the Super Bowl sometimes, I'm just blown away. And I think to myself, who approved this ad? How did it get on air? Because it's horrific. And
yeah.
yeah, and it's mind boggling. A lot of folks think, let me drop a celebrity in here and it's going to be great. Well, no, that's not how it works. It's like, is the celebrity meaningfully connected to your brand? Is their message resonating? So, yeah, I just having, launched that, I'm always, well, I appreciate what technology and data are bringing. Probably at the core for me, I'm still an idea guy. And I think those are what break through. And if you think about the clutter that we have today, if you don't have a big idea to break through, it's just a lot harder.
Yeah, another old school mindset here, Sean, is just how sports is a very relationship driven business. And that's a thesis that we really hold true with sports business leaders as we host events across the country. We have an association, and that's what we do is help build relationships for innovators, founders, entrepreneurs, professionals working in the sports industry. So you obviously know this better than myself and probably everybody on this call, but for people, especially for founders that are trying to partner with a team, a league, or major media companies, can you talk about what it actually takes for them to earn credibility and get some of those doors open?
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. And generally speaking, the sports industry is pretty small. It's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? I'm going to know somebody who knows somebody. That's just the way it's always going to be. So, you know, being a good human being and developing relationships is critical. And understanding sort of the ecosystem, sports organizations, don't tend to necessarily move very fast. They're very protective of their brand. Their rights are incredibly valuable. So they want to make sure any move they're making is going to only continue to build their business. So taking a chance or taking a flyer is not often what's going to happen in sports. They're going to vet it. And so that's where credibility comes from. Proof that your concept is good, proof that your concept works, proof that your concept is, going to engage fans, and add value to, what the league or the team or whatever is already doing. Because once somebody who's in a startup or founder can show traction that they've demonstrated fan engagement or they've driven revenue, well, then you've got proof of concept. And then that's what really makes a big difference. It can't be just a cool idea. It's got to be something that actually works.
Yeah. Yeah. And that traction at the end of the day is the number one thing that every founder or company should be targeting. And, it's something that we talk about all the time on the podcast and hear advice from people that sales has to be at the center of the business no matter what. You
Yep.
can think about these great ideas, but at the end of the day, is it driving towards greater sales? And if it's not, then maybe it's not the best thing to focus on for right now.
Yep. I would agree because it's and what's happening today in sports when you think about it is everybody's the thing that generates the largest revenue are the live game rights, right? But that audience continues to get older. If you look at the average age of the guys watching NFL, MLB, it's all in the 40s. And it's not a problem that the leagues talk about too often because the value continues to go up and they continue to get rights fees increases. But at some point, the younger fans who are now, in some cases, more fans of athletes than they are teams, right? They follow their favorite athletes. It may not be about the team, the distractions that they have, from gaming, series and movies on streaming services. So while sports continues to be highly valuable, you can see it with the increase in rights fees and private equity investment. They've got a challenge over the next, call it 10, 20, 15 years. That's why you heard not too long ago where Adam Silver, just sort of, it was an aside. He just threw it out and nobody really glommed onto it, where he's like, maybe we should take the game from 48 minutes down to 40 minutes. And first of all, the players go because they see revenue decline, right? Because if we're not playing as much revenue, so we can't do that. We can't do that. But I'm not saying that's the right answer. But the fact that he's even seeing that and thinking that way tells you they're starting to recognize that fan eyeballs. We got to think that's why, what MLB has done to speed the game up. Nobody wants to sit through a 3.5 hour baseball game anymore. How do I get it at least under 3 hours and push 2.5 so that more people, attendance is never a problem because that's a live fan experience. Take the family. It's a lot of fun. But watching a 3 hour baseball game on TV, that's tough.
I find it fascinating. And for the generation behind myself, I'm a older Gen Z, so I'm in my late 20s. But for myself and a lot of my friends, we're kind of, it feels like the last generation that's actually watching the games from start to finish. And I hear about guys and girls that have kids that are not doing that. And they're all on their phones and they're focused on athletes in particular, not necessarily a team. So it will be interesting. And I'm really intrigued to learn about how this is going to progress over the next decade or 20 years.
Yeah, I think the ones, we talked a lot about technology here. The ones that start to use technology and we talked about emotion, that use technology to deepen that emotional connection is where you're gonna win because, you know, at the end of the day, unlike, movies or, award shows or whatever, which are just entertainment, sports, as we know, is a community, right? Brings people together and we share the experience. So the the guys that figure out how to do that and continue to do that in a more meaningful, better way, like I like the alternative broadcast thing. So I can now, if I got Disney's producing it, my 8-year-old son or my 8-year-old grandson, I can sit down and watch that with them. It's entertaining for them because it's Disney themed. They got Disney characters. I'm still getting some of the game action and, it's live. So it's watching the progress of the game. So they're going to have to, and technology will allow more of those opportunities and they're going to have to continue to push that envelope there because it's just, to your point, you're like the last generation that's going to watch, a 3 hour baseball game.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, Sean, when you're talking about how sports is all about a feeling. And what I find really interesting is if you're just thinking about it at a macro perspective, a product at the end of the day, people find valuable for what it can do for them. It's all about the feelings and the connections that it creates for the person. And, I think back to personal experiences being a Philly guy with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl and the memories that creates. So I think as technology progresses and people, just although over the next generations are going to be focused on fans in particular, not necessarily teams, are always going to be drawn to sports just for those reasons with the feelings and the relationships that it builds.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing that can happen for any professional team is a fan becomes apathetic, right? You want they to love me, but I'd rather have them hate me than not have any feeling whatsoever, right? Like the Dallas Cowboys love the fact that, they're America's team and as many people that like them hate them, right? Eagles fans hate the Cowboys. But that means you're going to watch because you maybe want to see them lose. If you don't care, like sadly, I'm a Jets fan. I'm starting to become apathetic. It's like after 15 years, you haven't been in the playoffs. I don't know how many more ways you can screw this up. It's like, why turn the game on? Because you know what the outcome is going to be. So that's the worst thing that can happen for a team.
Yeah. Just to round out the conversation here, Sean, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are trying to build a successful company in the sports business world today?
Look, I think the guys that are going to succeed are ideally the ones that understand the pain points because that's what you want to come in and solve, right? And whether that's for leagues or teams or athletes, it's build solutions that sort of fit within their ecosystem and are either solving a pain point or adding value somehow. Like we talked about a little earlier, it can't just sound like a great idea. You're going to have proof of concept. You're going to have to demonstrate impact. And once you do that, then you're in pretty good shape. Ultimately, it's about, fans and storytelling. And if you're somehow enhancing the fan experience or improving storytelling or giving them information or access that they've never had before, that's a win. And so if you're playing in that arena, then I think you've got a good shot of being successful. Now, a lot of other factors come into play. Can you find the right investment, you know, guys to get behind it for you? Do you have the right relationships to demonstrate the efficacy of your product? But first things first, and that's, having something that's going to add value, improve the fan experience and or make things easier somehow for the team, league, et cetera.
Awesome. Well, Sean, I appreciate everything today. What would be the best way for the audience to stay in touch with you?
I mean, you can reach me on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to be connected, have a conversation. Somebody saw something here today and you have a question and want to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have you do that on email. It's Sean.Hanrahan and I'll tell you the story. It's at bbthd.com. If anybody can tell me what bbthd stands for, I'll send you a nice bottle of wine.
I don't know.
It stands for Built by the Home Depot.
Wow.
Remember the game day example I gave you?
Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
Man, that's cool. I really appreciate that, Sean. And I never really thought that I would talk to the guy who came up with the concept. So I love it.
Yeah. That's number one on my list, and they've had a great run with it. And game day continues to grow, and it's been very successful on both sides. That's a great example of a sponsorship that's effective and has grown in value over the years.
Yes, sir. All right, Sean. Well, thank you again.